As the Indianapolis Colts inch closer to the end of the preseason and towards roster cutdown day, it's time for us to do our roster cut predictions. We're going to dive into who we think makes it, and do players like Jelani Woods and Isaiah Land find themselves on the outside looking in? Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Hicks, your resident film nerd of HorseshoeHuddle.com. My partner, Jake Arthur, is typically our credentialed boots on the ground. He was not on site today because he gets a rare off day in terms of going to the facility. The Colts do not have practice today. So we found out today is probably the best day to do our early 53-man roster prediction. We will do one like the day before roster cutdowns as well, as new information comes out from the joint practices, from the Packers game, and from the Bengals game. But as of right now, where it stands with only one more training camp practice left, this is what we think happens with the Colts roster. We're going to go through this position by position. We're going to each list off which players we would keep. Some of these position groups are going to be a lot easier than others, so that's how we'll expedite this process a little bit. And then the ones that really have a debate between me and Jake, we'll argue it out, talk it out, and really give you guys the lowdown on that. We'll also talk about some practice squad players, so stay tuned for that as well. But at quarterback, Jake, I don't think there's anyone debating this. It's Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones, Riley Leonard will be the three guys who make the team. I don't see any avenue for that not to be the case. And then our last cut that we each have is Jason Bean missing the roster. I think the only interesting aspect to talk about this here, Jake, and I'll kick it to you in a second, is I don't think they bring Jason Bean back on the practice squad. By your reporting, I think you've mentioned like in developmental periods this offseason, he's maybe got like a handful of reps at best. Where last year he was getting a lot more. But this year, because they have Riley Leonard and they like Riley Leonard enough, Bean has kind of been the odd man out in terms of just even getting reps this offseason. So I think if they do go with a practice squad quarterback this year, I don't think it's going to be Jason Bean, and he'll be able to explore options elsewhere, or maybe, take that contract to the UFL and be that first overall pick that he was.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly has the rights to do that if he would like to, but I think you make a good point there with, does he make the roster? Because, again, they kind of let you know what they're thinking with the amount of reps guys get. And Bean yesterday got his first reps in what felt like at least a week or week and a half. And ever since there was a really disastrous developmental series, they were doing live tackling and everything, and he was quarterbacking in it, and it just didn't go well. And his reps have dwindled mightily since then. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen. I will say there probably is a slight question. I at least hear this occasionally is, do you think they hang on to Leonard with, on the roster? And I say yes, only because they like him. And I think they see him as a long-term backup option. And I don't think they want to risk him to the waiver wire. So I do think Riley, they're not going to try and get him practice squad. I think they keep three quarterbacks here. So yeah, not a lot of mystery there. I think the mystery really starts when you look at running back, and it's, do they keep any more than three? Do they keep four? So for us here, we've got Jonathan Taylor, DJ Giddens, and Tyler Goodson, one of the summer camp sweethearts this year, which means Khalil Herbert on the outside looking in. And so for Herbert, number one, he's hurt right now, which, to our credit, you and I, we were thinking this before he got hurt. The last we saw him was against the Ravens in the preseason game. Taylor's going to make it. Giddens is going to make it. But it's really been Goodson is the guy that has made Herbert expendable. He's a core special teamer that they hold in very high regard, and that includes being one of the two gunners, and he's also the backup kickoff returner. So the guy holds a lot of weight there on special teams. But also as a running back, he's not been looking bad. He's got just as much explosiveness as Herbert does. He's been the Colts pass catching back for a couple years now. And, as of yesterday, I really started to take notice of his abilities in pass protection. He picked up a couple blitzes very, very well yesterday. And again, if you can set yourself apart as like the guy in pass protection, then that's very valuable, and that's going to get you some reps, because that's the whole reason Trey Sermon was a thing the last couple of years, was because he was their best option, I guess, outside of Zach Moss in pass protection. So, the more you can do, and Goodson is contributing in a multitude of ways, which surprisingly enough to me, I didn't think this would happen a couple months ago, but has Herbert on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I think Herbert would be one of my last few cuts I would make for this Colts team. He is a vested veteran, so you wouldn't have to pass him through waivers. So maybe you could have, a handshake deal to get him on the practice squad and be like a call up for the first month of the season as well. Just to get him back on the roster if you like him enough and want to have that depth at running back. But ultimately, it comes down to a numbers game, and it's hard to take from some of these other positions, especially when there's injuries that aren't requiring guys to go on injured reserve. So you can't just open up that spot. So if you had to make a cut down anywhere, it's going to be to a fourth running back or third running back who doesn't play any special teams and hasn't had like the greatest camp ever. He's been fine in camp, but hasn't been like the greatest camp ever. So yeah, running back only 3, not the 4 that we expected maybe coming into camp. But talking about expecting coming into camp, I think wide receiver has been set in stone since early last camp, like last year's camp. The same 6 guys are going to be returning at wide receiver. Again, Jake and I are lock and step here when it comes to receiver. Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, A.D. Mitchell, Ashton Dulin, and Anthony Gould. Again, I don't think there's really any conversation to be had about any of these guys missing the team. It really comes down to which 1 or 2 guys are they going to put on the practice squad. It's been DJ Montgomery and it's been Laquan Treadwell the last couple of years. Maybe a player like Coleman Owen can get on there. I've liked what I've seen from Coleman Owen, but I think they have their 6 and they technically have their 8 if you count Treadwell and Montgomery being practice squad guys. And that hasn't changed in the last 2 years. And I mean, gosh, some of these guys have been around forever with this team. So wide receiver feels pretty set in stone right now.
Yeah, and I'm with you on the practice squad. I think Treadwell, they really, really like him. I'm iffy on Montgomery because they do like him, but he's been banged up. And if you're only going to pull in, 2 or 3, I think Coleman Owen is almost a lock for the practice squad. He's done a lot of really good things. He's the only other guy that's received punt return reps this summer other than Anthony Gould. He has a really good connection with Riley Leonard. Those two have helped each other look good at a lot of portions of 11-on-11s. So yeah, I think Coleman Owen gets on there. Let's not waste any more time on the shoe-ins here. Let's talk about tight end, because this one, there's some discourse to be had here. Maybe not between us, but I just think in general, Tyler Warren, obviously, we have Mo Alley-Cox, Drew Ogletree, and Will Mallory, which leaves Jelani Woods on the outside looking in. This is not what my heart desires, but I think this is probably what winds up happening. So we've pretty much put Will Mallory and Jelani Woods battling for one spot, and both guys have made plenty of plays throughout training camp. Whether it's, I think they both did decent things in the game, if I'm not mistaken. I've slept since then, but training camp definitely they've both had their high moments. And the difference is, though, Will Mallory has been doing it with the first and second team, and Jelani Woods has been pretty steadily with the third team. Occasionally, some work with the second team. So again, that's something that the coaches are telling you what they think there. So if you got 2 guys jockeying for one spot and they're kind of, let's just say they're tied, they're going to give it to the guy who's been with the more valuable players surrounding him. So I personally think Drew Ogletree and Mo Alley-Cox is too much of having the same thing. And there's room to have Mallory and Woods on there as 2 pass catchers. Probably has a little more impact on your team. But nonetheless, I think that's probably how it's going to go.
Yeah, no, I agree. This Colts team wants to be a good running team this year, and I think it's hard to keep 2 tight ends who aren't the best in blocking when it comes to Jelani Woods and Will Mallory. And we're already looking at tight end 4 probably being a healthy scratch for a good chunk of games this year, which will be like a Mallory. If you add Jelani Woods in there with him, like if you keep 5, then you're just having 2 guys be healthy scratches for most of the season. It doesn't make sense to keep 5. And I think those top 3 guys are pretty locked in. And it feels like Will Mallory in recent weeks has gone from roster hopeful, roster bubble to pretty solidified as tight end 4. So Jake and I so far from quarterback to tight end are in complete agreement. But coming up in a second, guys, we are going to change a little bit. We are going to disagree on this show for the first time in forever, I guess, and talk about what we see happening in the trenches and which different ways the Colts could go with these trench battles coming up.
This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It is the best time of the year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means that fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. You know, Zach and I are going to be playing on Yahoo Fantasy again this year, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. I've been in a few Yahoo leagues for a decade plus, and I have no intention of leaving them because I really like the setup. I think it's really user-friendly. And to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. Let's kick it off by mentioning that they just dropped the Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, which is a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there is only one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now is the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. So stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. Welcome back, everybody. We are talking 53-man roster predictions today. We just discussed quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. Now we are getting into the big uglies. We're going to talk about the trench players. So let's start with the offensive line first, of course, Zach. No mystery. Starting five is right there. Bernhard Ryman, Quentin Nelson, Tanner Bortolini, Matt Gonzalez, and Braden Smith. So we're going to discuss who we think, the 4 or 5 backups are going to be. So I'm going to put both Blake Freeland and Jalen Travis in there. And then for some interior depth, Danny Pinter and Dalton Tucker. So while I don't think Dalton Tucker's probably quite ready to be a starter like he did for a chunk last year, I think they really like the prospect of him being like their first guard in if somebody goes down. And they obviously like Pinter at center as well. The big mystery is, though, like Jalen Travis, he's shown that he's pretty nimble for his size. Like guys that size don't move that well. Like the basketball background really shows. But Freeland, can he rebound from basically being decimated off of the roster last year for the most part? He went from like 700 snaps as a rookie to like 23 or something last year. It was like an enormous drop off because Matt Gonzalez obviously won that swing tackle job. So who's going to win the swing tackle job, and does it completely like erase the other guy from getting any reps whatsoever throughout the year?
Yeah, and I think the other question, too, is how much do they believe in Blake Freeland? Because I think if you were to poll, like, Indianapolis Colts fans, and I'm not trying to say fan opinion is the most important thing when it comes to running an organization, but I think if you were to poll a majority of people who watch this team, I think almost everybody would say Blake Freeland hasn't really earned a spot on this roster. It's just been struggle after struggle after struggle the last couple of years, and so far this preseason, it hasn't looked much better for Blake Freeland either. So if the Colts are able to find a tackle that, I'm not saying there's going to be a good tackle in the market because who in their right mind would cut a good offensive tackle at this point in the NFL? But if they find someone more intriguing to develop, we could see maybe Freeland waived with the final cut downs and then a waiver claim for, another younger guy to come in here and be that ninth offensive lineman.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. We have the same 9 guys making it. I think Josh Sills is a prime practice squad guy. They clearly like him a good bit. Vavayo is a guy that you're a really big fan of at center. Can make a lot of sense as well as a practice squad guy. So we're still in lockstep there, Jake. But here is where we differ. So let's get into the defensive trenches because we had some really tough cuts on the defensive line. You decided to keep 5 defensive tackles while I only kept 4. So we're going to go with your 5 defensive tackles first. We got Buckner and Grover Stewart, obviously. Neville Gallimore, Adetomiwa Adebore, and Tim Smith were the 5 that you kept. I kept the same top 4, but I cut Tim Smith in mine. So we'll give your reasoning first why you kept 5, and then I'll, have my rebuttal afterwards.
Yeah, so this definitely seems like a prime spot for a waiver pickup for the Colts here. When I look at the backup nose tackles, no one has really stood out to me yet. Eric Johnson was, insurance in case Tim Smith didn't step up. And then Josh Tupou was like the comfort item for Lou Anarumo. And so Tupou was probably my toughest cut because to me, if they were not blown away by any of the three, Lou may be most comfortable with Tupou. But at the same time, in my reasoning, I would just probably give it to the draft pick. We obviously can't predict waiver pickups, which is my main thing here, although I think they're very much ripe for that. So I just figured, Tim Smith is a guy they drafted and they had high hopes for being able to develop. And if everything is a tie, then why not go with the young guy who you still see upside in? We know who Eric Johnson is by now. Josh Tupou is kind of a fallback option. And again, if no one is separating, which they definitely have their own views on these guys. I personally haven't seen any of the three really set themselves apart. I would give it to the rookie.
Yeah, no, I completely get your reasoning. And that's actually why I only kept 4 defensive linemen and decided not to have a backup at 1 tech, because I'm going to do the practice squad thing with backup nose tackle, because none of these 3 guys are separating in camp. I'm going to try to get all 3 to the practice squad, and then I'll just keep calling them up in the first couple of weeks, get him up there and see which guy acclimates the best before signing him to the roster. I think Tim Smith is the toughest one only because he's the riskiest one to cut. Eric Johnson, I think he's hit vested vet status as well. So you can just cut him. That one's a little tough. I'm not too sure. We'll have to look that one up after the show. But I think Eric Johnson has hit vested vet. I know Josh Tupou is a vested vet, so you can cut him without going through waivers. So Tupou, at the very least, you can get on the practice squad. Eric Johnson, I doubt there's a big market for him at this point. He's been cut by the Patriots, been cut by the Colts the last couple of years. I think the Colts could get him to the practice squad. And then if they could also get Tim Smith, then I think you could play that roster games with the 1 tech, with those roster call-ups throughout the first couple weeks. So trust me, guys, I'm the last person in the world who doesn't want to back up 1 tech on this team. I love the big defensive linemen. I would be watching the Baltimore Ravens and just hoping they cut one of those 370-pound defensive tackles that were eating the Colts alive in that first preseason game. Just give me one of those guys. That would be awesome. But when you have a situation like this where none of these guys are really taking that backup spot, I think I would like to do the practice squad roster games a little bit. And also another reason why I had to cut a defensive tackle is to make room for an extra player at defensive end. So
you had to do it.
I had to. So Jake at defensive end only kept 5 players while I kept 6. So Jake's 5 players were the obvious: Leatu Latu, Kwity Paye, Samson Ebukam, Taekwon Lewis, and JT Tuimoloau. I kept the same 5, but I had to keep Isaiah Land. I just couldn't cut Isaiah Land. And here's my reasoning for keeping Isaiah Land. And I'm sure he was the 54th guy on Jake's roster projection too. So it makes sense for both of us. Yeah. Right. It's awful. My argument for is JT Tuimoloau is going to play a lot on the interior, especially on pass rushing downs, which gives the need for an extra edge. But also with Isaiah Land, he's like 235-ish pounds, 238 pounds. This is a guy who can still run like a linebacker. So if whatever you're lacking at linebacker for special teams, for instance, Isaiah Land can kind of fill the gap a little bit more so than a typical defensive end. So I even debated going smaller at linebacker because I had Isaiah Land for special teams at defensive end. Ultimately, I didn't end up going that route because there were just other things there with the roster. But I think that could be an avenue the Colts attack is hey, we keep 4 linebackers plus 6 defensive ends, with Isaiah Land being that 6th defensive end who can also play special teams. So I think there are avenues to keep Isaiah Land. And ultimately it comes down to this. This is a guy I don't want to cut. I think he gets claimed by somebody. Somebody's going to claim Isaiah Land. I'm not saying he's a world beater because we're talking about roster bubble guys, but I really like how he's developed. I think his run defense has gotten a lot better. His pass rushing has gotten better. And look, the Colts have invested 2 years in this guy's development. Let's not release him for 30-year-old edge rushers coming off Achilles injuries and 30-year-olds that haven't really progressed the last couple of years. I'm not saying he's better than them, but I'd like to have the insurance of that younger pass rusher who's been improving behind them.
And those were all the reasons he was arguably my toughest cut of all of this. Trust me, I also think the world of Isaiah Land as a player. I think he should have been used more last year. I don't know. I don't think I think it's just purely a numbers game. I don't think they're going to cut Taekwon Lewis. He's kind of a locker room glue guy, and I think they feel comfortable having him. I mean, the caveat with all this is that it is Lou Anarumo now, but I think Chris Ballard is going to have a lot to do with this as well. So I just don't think they're going to cut Tyquan Lewis, although, and it's not that I would want to see Tyquan Lewis go, but I do want to see a lot more of Isaiah Land. I just don't think they'll do it. So surely if they can get Land on the practice squad, great. I don't think it'll happen. I think that he'll get sniped just like they sniped the Cowboys. My other guy I would get on the practice squad, though, is Darrell Anchami. That guy's been an animal all summer. He had a big play. I think it was him and Adetomiwa got the sack against the Ravens. But Anchami's had like 4 or 5 sacks that I've noticed throughout camp, and that he's probably done more if that's all I've noticed. So, yeah, he has been he reminds me a little bit of Isaiah Land at this stage of his career. Both guys really flashing with that second, third team defense, primarily third team. Did some good things in their initial preseasons in the NFL. So, yeah, and Chami, I think, has got a bright future and definitely, like, he is among the bottom of the roster guys. Like, he's probably the first one I would get on the practice squad.
Right. No, I completely agree. And Chami's got a long way to go with his run defense, especially with that, that Ravens game was kind of rough for him in run defense, but the pass rushing upside is there. If you can get him on the practice squad, I certainly would develop him, especially if you lose Isaiah Land, which I really hope they don't. But I digress. We've already talked a lot about that. Coming up, guys, we're going to talk about the linebacker room, the corner room, and the safety room to round out this 53-man roster conversation. I can't even really call it predicting because we have differing ones, but conversation around the 53-man roster.
August 26th, mark it on your calendar, is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. So take that flyer on the MVP race. Is Patrick Mahomes about to get back to his gaudy statistics and get back in that MVP conversation? Crown your champion in August. Maybe the Bills or Ravens can finally get over the hump this year. Or, parlay your division winner dark horses right now. Just visit FanDuel, the FanDuel app today, and start planning your future bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. All right, let's round this thing out with the back seven, Zach. Although we could just spend the rest of our time talking about special teams if you would prefer.
Yes, the one cut they have to make in special teams.
Literally, yeah, and they have almost publicly made it. But
yeah,
let's talk linebacker real quick. This one is tricky because a million different guys have had to get serious reps because of Zaire Franklin being out of the lineup, Jalen Carlisle being out of the lineup, and this goes back to the spring, which outside of Zaire Franklin obviously making it, I feel very comfortable in saying that Joe Bacci will be on the team. Cam McGrone will be on the team. I've also got Jalen Carlisle, obviously, and then I still have Shegu Alubi on here, which means that, unfortunately, you have to depart with Solomon DeShields, but that's kind of obvious. But that's a guy I would definitely get on the practice squad. He's been flashing a lot lately. I've seen him come up with a couple run stuffs. He's been able to sniff out some screen passes recently. So I really like what I've seen from DeShields. I think it looks like the game is slowing down for him a little bit more, and he's able to kind of click and close and process things a little better. I've seen a lot of growth from him from the start of camp to now.
Yeah, no, I think linebacker is really interesting because I could see them keeping anywhere between 4 and 6. You can make the argument for 4 because Lou Anarumo at most, he won't really play 3 linebackers at the same time on the field.
Yeah.
It'll be mostly 2, sometimes 1, sometimes 0 will be on the field at one time. So there may not be as big a need to keep 5 or 6 linebackers, but on the other hand, you want to have more linebackers for special teams, and depending on what they do at other positions, you might want to go heavy at linebacker. So I really went back and forth between 4 and 5 linebackers, but ultimately I kept the same 5 that you did by keeping Shegu Alubi. But I will say Alubi was probably my last guy on the roster to make the team, very final guy, because he has fallen out of favor, and I think Brian Mason will go to war for him. And I think that'll be the one saving grace.
Yeah, that was, for me, he was someone I was willing to cut, but at the same time being like one of the core special teamers, I was like, that's probably going to keep him around. He's been with the squad a couple years now. Like he's pretty entrenched in that role. So I don't think they're going to cut him.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then one more player I wanted to mention with linebacker is Austin Ajake. He was a guy that I debated for that final spot because he had been getting more defensive reps over Shegu Alubi. And I even think Lou Anarumo would go to bat more for Ajake than he would for Alubi. But I think ultimately it would come down more to Brian Mason on that final spot. And that's why I went with Shegu Alubi as well. Our last group that we actually differ on, Jake, here is the cornerback room. So only 3 groups in total we actually differed on in our 53-man roster projection. But at corner, you have Tarvarius Ward, Jalen Jones, Kenny Moore II, Juju Brents, Sam Womack, and you kept Chris Lamons as your final corner. I kept Alex Johnson. I think it's anyone's guess what happens at corner because this might be the position where they cut Shegu Alubi to make room for more corners because we'd be looking at 2 of these guys not being ready for week 1. And we don't even know if they're going to be IR candidates because of how long they could be out. We just don't have that information right now. So with how it stands on our roster predictions, the Colts would have 4 healthy corners on the roster. Actually, only 3 if you count the Kenny Moore injury, and he's still out of practice right now. Yeah. So it's kind of difficult. Like I debated going up to 7 or maybe 8 corners on the roster, but it's just really difficult numbers game to do that. So as of right now, that's who you have, and then you went with Lamons at the bottom of the roster. What led to you keeping Lamons over, Jonathan Edwards, Alex Johnson, or even Duke Shelley for that final spot?
Yeah, so corner easily has my fewest confidence points, and that's because of the injuries. I just felt like I had to pick a lineup here because I do think there's going to be some sort of movement at the beginning of the year. There almost has to be. But this group, it's just the one I'm most confident in. Number one, Lamons has come in the last 2 days of practice and been that nickel with Kenny out. So they immediately inserted him back in. They know him. He was a core special teamer for the team for the past couple years. He played, I think, a lot of defensive snaps for them, especially last year, if I remember correctly. So that's a guy that maybe Lou's not familiar with, but he just within the organization, they know what to expect from him. People can vouch for him. Again, he's already inserted himself into a decent role as long as Kenny Moore is out. At the same time, though, I'm pretty bullish on both Alex Johnson and Jonathan Edwards. I would be totally fine with either of them making it. It's not lost on me that both of them have seen serious reps on the outside since name your player has been injured, essentially. Lou doesn't seem to be willing to gush about either of them individually very much, even when asked specifically about them. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything. He could just be heartbroken about Justin Wally, which we all are. But that's another part of it. Wally being out kind of muddies these waters as well. So there's nothing they could do at the cornerback room that will surprise me at this point. I'll just put it that way because the injuries dictate everything.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. This could be a position group. Again, they keep up to 7 or 8 on the initial cut downs, and then they do a lot of the roster games immediately afterwards because of those injuries to Juju Brents, Jalen Jones, and heck, even Kenny Moore might be out a lot longer than we expect. We have no clue at this point with any of those injuries. The only reason I didn't keep Lamons as my final corner was because, again, vested vet that you can play the roster games with a little bit. You don't have to keep him initially. He could actually be a guy that you initially cut. And then when you put a Jalen Jones on injured reserve, then you could just, it could be one of those take your hat off, walk out the door, and then come back in kind of thing. He's not really going to go anywhere.
McKenzie this year.
Right. I think that's the exact player that you want to play those games with. You didn't sign him until last week. Nobody else really wants him, but he clearly has value in your room. He's never leaving the city of Indianapolis. So you can just have him come right back in. So I think he's the perfect player to play those roster games with. One more position of note to talk about here, because special teams are notable, but there's only one cut to be made there at special teams. So we'll get to that at the very end. But at safety, we both have Cameron Bynum, Nick Cross, Rodney Thomas II, and Hunter Wohler. And a guy that we kind of both trumpeted as a potential roster lock earlier in the offseason did fail to make our 53-man roster, and that is Daniel Scott. I think the big reason, at least for me, and you can say your reason too, Jake, I saw a lot of Rodney Thomas in that personal protector role when I was at the Baltimore Ravens training camp. I think he's kind of emerged as that guy. I mean, you've even mentioned Hunter Wohler in that spot recently as well. So I think it kind of made Daniel Scott a little bit more expendable. I still think they like Daniel Scott. I think they want him on the practice squad, but I think he slowly got pushed off the roster with Rodney Thomas taking more of that personal protector role recently.
Yes, that's kind of my thing, is as much attention as he's got on special teams, I haven't really noticed much defensively. Now, I did note that he made a nice play with a pass breakup yesterday, but at the same time, like, it's hard for us to tell how big of an impact a special teamer is making. And again, Hunter Wohler, he's not going to be a starter, so it's like if you're trying to find ways to keep him involved, and certainly special teams and that personal protector specifically would be a good way. You know, if you just plop him and Rodney Thomas in that backfield on the punt team, I think they'd be super comfortable with that. And then the other thing is, I just think they'll be able to get Daniel Scott onto the practice squad. I don't think it's the end of the line with him and the Colts. I could easily see him activated at some point. But I just haven't seen enough defensively as I kind of expected we would at some point. My confidence in him hasn't necessarily waned and jerked. Like I know I initially said probably just a couple weeks ago, like I was pretty comfortable saying he was going to be on the roster, but other guys have just kind of come in and eaten into the things he was doing. Yeah. And we haven't seen a lot of plays made defensively yet that I expected he might make. So I do think he makes the practice squad because, again, they love him. They've been patient with him for 2 years. It seems dumb to just totally cut bait at this point after you've been so patient. But yeah, I think he's probably a guy that'll be on the practice squad and probably find his way onto the roster at some point this year.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think they still like Daniel Scott, but certainly not a roster lock at this point. And because we're about to talk about special teams real quick before we get out of here, we did have a couple questions in our comment section about the personal protector role. This is the podcast for you, my friends, because we are the personal protector podcast. The personal protector is on the punting team. So when your team is punting, he's the player that is the furthest most back compared to the punter. So he's behind the rest of the blockers, and he's also the one who does the cadence, who calls out the protections on that. It's called the personal protector from everything I've heard. Some other teams might have different terms for it, but that's what Brian Mason has called it the last couple of years. So I think, what was it? It was Trevor Denbo for a couple of years, and it was also
Kylan Granson was the other guy. They
did it a couple times. Yep. So it's an important role. It's really like Denbo kept making rosters because of his special teams coverage and because of the personal protector. So that's why we put such an emphasis on it when we talk about the offseason a lot. So great question by DG2. We do need to clarify that every now and then because I know it's not a typical term that people know. But just round it out here with special teams, Spencer Schrader at kicker, Rigoberto Sanchez at punter, and Luke Rhodes at long snapper. I feel great about those three positions when it comes to this. That's where I feel great about. Do you have anything to say about those cuts there, Jake?
No, I mean, if I remember correctly, like I don't play Madden anymore, but wasn't Luke like the second-rated long snapper in Madden this year or something?
Oh, probably, but that means he's like a 40 overall.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for whatever that means to you guys, like I don't know how long snappers and such like make the Pro Bowl and all that, but I think Luke has an All-Pro and a Pro Bowl to his name throughout his long career, if I'm not mistaken. So
there we go.
Yeah, I mean, the kicking game never really, like, we've heard special teams coaches talk about what's wrong with the kicking game when it's going through slumps, and it's usually not the operation of snapper to holder to kicker. It's usually with the kicker. So, and not to mention, Sanchez has been here since 2017 and Rhodes since 2016, I think. Yeah. So that's two of your longest tenured players on the entire roster. If they weren't good, they wouldn't still be here. So,
I mean, they didn't even bring in competition for those guys, so they were certainly going to be here.
Yeah, and then obviously Spencer Schrader over Maddox Trujillo. There's a difference of like 10 or 11% in how they've kicked this summer. So yeah, Schrader clearly won the job to me.
Yep, absolutely. So that is our 53-man roster prediction as of right now. Again, we'll do a more fancy one the day before cut downs and maybe even make graphics with that. We'll play around with Canva a little bit to really do what we can. But we'll bring, again, more of an official one the day before. But as of right now, this is what it's looking like. I don't really see too much wiggle room, but there are a couple spots at the bottom of the roster, like those last 4 or 5 positions that could change. We want to thank you guys, though, for making Locked On Colts your first listen today and every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Bets. Betting experts Lee Sterling and Kevin Rogers have daily MLB locks and can't miss football futures. Find Locked On Bets on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcast. And if you guys want to become a Locked On Colts insider and chat with us directly and get that insider scoop, follow the link in our show notes. And if you don't already, make sure you're following at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks2, all on socials. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube, where we listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings, reviews, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow afternoon.